Hi, my name is Lacy.
And I'm Marina.
And we are the Wallflowers. Today we're diving into the case of Kirk Bloodsworth, a former Marine who actually became a fisherman in Maryland before being wrongfully convicted of one of the most heinous crimes imaginable.
He was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder, rape, and sexual assault of 9-year-old Dawn Hamilton in 1984, only to become the first person in the U.S. to be exonerated from death row by DNA evidence.
And trust us, this case is textbook example of how the justice system can fail. We've got bad eyewitness testimony, police tunnel vision, ignored evidence, and of course, the real killer slipping right through the cracks.
But before we get too deep into the story, let's set the scene.
It's July 25th, 1984, and we're in Rosedale, Maryland, a quiet little community near Baltimore. It's summer, kids are playing, and 9-year-old Dawn Hamilton is no exception.
That afternoon, Dawn and two other boys go into the woods near their neighborhood to look for a lost baseball. At some point, Dawn gets separated from them.
And sadly, she never comes out.
Hours later, her body is discovered. She had been sexually assaulted, raped, and murdered in a wooded area near her home.
It was a horrific crime. The police were under immense pressure to find a suspect quickly, and that's where things start going downhill.
Enter Kirk Bloodsworth, a 22-year-old former Marine who had no criminal record and no connection to Dawn.
So how did he become the prime suspect?
Well, 5 different witnesses came forward and said they saw a man who looked like Kirk Bloodsworth near the crime scene.
And when we say looked like, we mean loosely. Like the description they gave us was a tan, skinny, 6'5" Caucasian man with curly blonde hair and a bushy mustache.
Which, let's be real, could describe a good bit of people in the area. But the thing is, Kirk didn't even fit this description. He is 6 foot tall, has red hair, not blonde. He weighs roughly 200 pounds, and he wears glasses, which is something the witnesses never mentioned.
But the police had made up their minds. They put together a photo lineup of set pictures of different men, and 2 witnesses picked Kirk's photo.
The problem? These kind of lineups are super unreliable, especially when police already believe someone is guilty. Even the way they present the lineup can influence witnesses.
And it gets worse. One witness actually hesitated before picking Kirk, but was encouraged to go with their gut.
Because gut feelings are always the best way to determine the fate of a man's life.
Right? And from there, it was game over. Kirk got arrested, charged, and put on trial.
So let's talk about the evidence the prosecution had against Kirk.
Spoiler alert, there isn't any.
No fingerprints, no DNA, no physical evidence linking him to the crime. The police were grasping at straws for evidence that simply wasn't there.
Just the eyewitnesses and a few misleading statements that Kirk made to the police.
Yeah, Kirk talked to the police without a lawyer, a mistake a lot of innocent people make. He gave inconsistent details about his whereabouts, which, let's be honest, most of us would too if we were suddenly being interrogated about a murder we didn't commit.
But the jury didn't care. In 1985, Kirk was found guilty of first-degree murder, rape, and sexual assault, and was sentenced to death.
Think about that for a second. He was 22 years old and just got handed a death sentence based on nothing but mistaken identity and some offhand statements.
He sat on death row for nearly 2 years before his sentence was overturned on appeal. But even then, he was convicted again in a retrial and sentenced to life in prison.
This is where things take a turn, because Kirk didn't give up.
While in prison, he started reading everything he could about criminal justice and forensic science, and in 1992, he stumbled across a book about DNA testing.
Who knew reading could be that important?
Right, and he realized that if the evidence from the crime scene still existed, DNA testing could prove his innocence.
He fought hard for the evidence to be tested, something that wasn't common in the early 90s. The police still had the victim's clothing from the crime scene, which contained the attacker's DNA.
And guess what? When the test came back, the DNA did not match Kirk Bloodsworth.
He was completely innocent.
Thanks to pressure from his legal team, the Innocence Project got involved and helped push for his full exoneration.
If you're unfamiliar, the Innocence Project is an organization that uses DNA testing to help wrongfully convicted people prove their innocence. Since its founding, they've helped exonerate hundreds of innocent people.
Kirk was officially exonerated and released in 1993 after spending 9 years in prison for a crime he did not commit.
But here's the kicker. The real killer, Kimberly Shea Ruffner, was in the same prison as Kirk the entire time.
Ruffner had a violent criminal history and was later linked to the crime through DNA testing in 2003.
Imagine sitting in prison for almost a decade knowing you're innocent while the real murderer is literally right there.
After getting out, Kirk dedicated his life to criminal justice reform. He fought for the Innocence Protection Act, which passed in 2004 and expanded access to DNA testing for prisoners.
He also helped create the Kirk Bloodsworth Post-Conviction DNA Testing Program, which funds DNA testing for inmates who claim innocence.
So what can we learn from all of this?
First, eyewitness testimony is not always reliable. People make mistakes, and those mistakes can literally ruin lives.
Second, DNA testing is crucial in criminal cases. If it weren't for DNA evidence, Kirk Bloodsworth would have spent his life in prison, or even worse, been executed.
And finally, wrongful convictions still happen. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. There are hundreds of innocent people still behind bars today.
And that's why organizations like the Innocence Project are so important.
And that's why we need to question everything, always.
Well, that wraps it up for today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe and follow us for more true crime deep dives.
And remember, just because someone looks guilty, or even if the evidence is pointing to them, it doesn't always mean they are.
Stay curious, Wallflowers. Sponsor!
This episode is brought to you by
Miss Ward's High Heels.
one of the few things that has never given up in this classroom.
And with the purchase of these high heels, you'll get your very own number 2 pencil to put in your hair.
You can find this product at www.wardrobe.com.
wardrobe.com.